What is going on, everyone, and welcome to r/NuclearRevenge. This subreddit has some of the most incredible revenge stories of all time. They go above and beyond anything you will ever find on r/prorevenge. Trust me, they're incredible. Just like today's first story, in which a guy is bullied, unfortunately, in his childhood by one horrible character, but then spends the next 20 years completely decimating their life. Honestly, I'm recording this intro after I've read the story, and guys, trust me, do not click off this video. This one is absolutely mad. Excuse me, Satan, I think you're in my seat. I'm going to start this story off by saying that this is absolutely not one of my most shining moral moments, and that I'm well aware that I was a straight up butthole for doing what I did. My only real defense is that I was in a super bad place mentally and needed a mountain's worth of therapy. If you're curious about the circumstances around her, check my profile. This female dog was evil in human form. Now, on with the revenge. I was a weird kid growing up, really weird. It was mostly because I was being abused at home and forcibly isolated. My social skills were so underdeveloped that I had difficulty reading human faces, aside from my grandmother, grandfather, and father. Being the weird kid meant that I was a juicy target for bullies. It never stopped, but there was one bully that I hated more than any of the others. We'll call her Holly. This girl never passed up on an opportunity to make my life heck, and since she lived across the street from me, there was nowhere I could avoid her. Holly treated me like garbage. Here are a few examples. She put dog poop in our mailbox on a regular basis. She let my dog out of my yard and I was never able to get her back. She would also sit on her porch with her friends and roast the heck out of me to entertain them if I so much as put a toe outside of my front door. It went on for years. I hated her with the fiery passion of 1,000 suns, but while my grandmother was still alive, there was nothing I could do about Holly. If I did anything to her or fought back in any way, my grandmother would punish me for it, and I was more afraid of her than I was Holly, for a very good reason. So I made a plan. I suffered through all the abuse and promised myself that when I was older, I would make Holly pay for what she did to me. Thinking of what I was going to do to her when the time was right was sometimes the only thing that actually kept me going. Over time, Holly grew up, and eventually she left me alone and stopped being a butthole. Unfortunately for her, by then it was too late. I did not give a dang about her new moral epiphany. I'd been nursing my grudge for 2 decades, and it was time for a reckoning. I was going to destroy that female dog. When my grandmother finally died, it was go time, and I'd had 20 years to plan. I wasn't idle while I waited. I'd made it my mission in life to learn as much about Holly as possible, and to do it, I became friends with a few people on the periphery of her social circle. Eventually, I knew more about her and her life than her own mother did. The first step I took in my plan was getting her fired from her job. It took longer than I would have liked, but eventually I managed it. Holly worked at a doctor's office, and I knew that the doctor she worked for was super Christian. Very straight edge, upstanding type of guy. He also had a huge influence on the local community. I decided to become a patient at his office, scheduling my visits to be on the days Holly was off work. After a couple of visits, I just happened to notice Holly in the staff photo on the waiting room wall. I made a show of looking surprised and then concerned. I got to the exam room and the doctor came in shortly after. The expression on my face got his attention and he asked me what was wrong. I told him that even though I didn't want to, as a Christian, I couldn't keep my knowledge a secret and still sleep at night because I just couldn't let him endanger his soul and reputation by doing nothing. I had his full attention then, and I asked him as one fellow Christian to another not to tell anyone where he got the information I was about to give him. After he promised he would, I told him that I knew that Holly was using illegal drugs. He was absolutely floored, and at first he didn't believe me. I told him that I understood his skepticism entirely, but it was easy enough to prove or disprove my information with a drug test. If I was wrong, he lost nothing. If I was right, he was saving himself from trouble down the road. He finally agreed to test her, and he tested everyone else too, so that it didn't look like Holly was the only target. See, I wasn't actually lying. Holly smoked a load of weed, and I knew that because it was my dad she used to get it from. He'd been her dealer dude since she was like 15. Her test came back positive for marijuana, and much to my surprise, Xanax. Oopsie, the doctor fired Holly on the spot when the results of the urinalysis came back, and then he called me to thank me for telling him what was going on, and before he hung up, he told me that I truly walked with the Lord. You guys will never know how hard I had to fight not to laugh at the depth of his wrongness. I thought I was going to pop a blood vessel. So that's phase 1 complete. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's just a job and it's not like she can't go get another one, right? Losing a job isn't the end of the world. Yeah, you'd be wrong. Remember how I said that her boss had a very high reputation in our area? That man called every single hospital and doctor's office in the state personally to make sure that none of them would hire Holly and risk liability and loss of community trust for associating with her. Holly's field of study was all pertaining to the medical profession, so her education was rendered worthless because nobody would hire her. But I wasn't done yet. Nope, not even close. She lost her job, and because she had no income, her car got repossessed. She still had her family though, 2 kids and a fiance. Who needs families though, am I right? With the help of a good friend of mine, we catfished the F out of her fiance. My friend is hot as F, and she let me use pictures of her to prove that she was really real. She even got on Skype with him once. When he finally made the arrangements for a face-to-face encounter and booked a hotel room, I texted the screenshots of everything to Holly from a burner number. To say the excrement impacted the oscillating units would be a vast understatement. They broke up, the whole thing was an ordeal, and Holly was devastated. She had 2 kids, no job, and now no fiance who could help her keep the family afloat. A normal person would have stopped then. Unfortunately, I am not normal, and I was going full scorched earth. I seethed for 20 years. No way in heck was I going easy on her. So, roll on phase 3. With her fiance gone and no job, Holly was struggling badly. She needed money and she needed it quickly before she and the kids got evicted. Meth is a giant problem in my area. It's high risk, but it's also fast money. And so, I started subtly mentioning Holly's situation among my more legally questionable family. Eventually, one of my family's friends, who happened to be a meth cook, got in contact with Holly and offered her a trash load of cash to let him cook dope at her house. It was supposed to be a one-time thing, 2 days and then done forever. Holly was so desperate, so she said yes. Everything went smoothly at first, but dead in the middle of the cook, someone called in an anonymous tip about an active cook in progress to the local narcotics unit. They rolled up on Holly's house at about 3 AM and caught everybody inside, including Holly red-handed making meth. Watching her cry when they handcuffed her and putting her in that police cruiser was one of the most gloriously satisfying moments of my life. She was in deep legal doo-doo, and to make a bad situation even worse, most houses where labs are discovered aren't deemed habitable afterwards because the toxic fumes from the chemicals used to make the drug get everywhere, and it's super hard and time-consuming to clean. It's up to the property owner to either hire a hazmat team to clean it or condemn it and tear it down. A lab cleanup costs thousands of dollars. It would have cost more money to clean it than the entire property was worth. So it got torn down with everything Holly owned still inside. See, you can't take things out of a meth lab because they're going to be covered in toxic residue. It can make you very sick, especially young children. Everything in the residence is usually counted as a loss. Now, some people sneak in and grab stuff anyway, but whatever, it's their funeral. But since Holly was still sitting in jail, there was no way for her to get anything, and none of her close family were interested in risking getting caught sneaking into the house and being accused of stealing or tampering with a crime scene. Holly ended up in jail for a while, and while she was gone, the court gave their father, the ex-fiancé, sole custody of their children, and Holly was only given supervised visitation, 2 hours every Saturday if I recall correctly. Revenge is a dish best served cold, and mine was freezing. I was behind every single bad thing that happened in Holly's life, in one way or another, for an entire 5-year period. She decided she liked bullying me and making my life heck, and she figures there would never be any consequences. But instead, I took her reputation, her job, her fiance, got her arrested and convicted of a felony, and her children taken from her. And the best part is that she has no clue I did it to this very day. She'd forgotten about about me. What she did to me impacted my life forever, but to her, it wasn't even important enough to bother remembering. I was nothing to her, so she never connected me to her problems. Last I heard, she was in rehab for alcoholism and had her parental rights terminated permanently. After she lost her kids, she just sort of gave up and crawled into a bottle and never came out again. I was tempted to tell her, but I decided that the helplessness and confusion about why everything suddenly went to heck in a handbasket was the better plan, because that means that every now and again I can contact her and pretend to actually give a dang about her troubles to get a fresh revenge female dog about her newest tale of woe. She thinks I'm the nicest person she's ever met. Incredible. And there you go. I mean, guys, I told you this story was mad in the introduction, and was I wrong? No. I mean, it doesn't get any more crazy than this. I mean, bullying is a horrible, horrible thing to do. And to be fair, like, the majority of bullies do tend to get away with it, right? They bully someone and then there's no real repercussions. Or if there are repercussions, they're very short term, maybe getting told off by a teacher or something like that. But no, bullying can obviously have lasting effects. I imagine a lot of people, a lot of you watching right now, have been bullied or maybe are still being bullied right now, and you know how horrible it can be. But wow, what a way to absolutely destroy someone's life. Thinking of this plan over the next 20 years and then putting it in place over the next however many years that I imagine this story went on for, just the sheer number of things, OP, that you did to absolutely destroy someone. I mean, I read one paragraph and I thought, that's insane. Then the next one came. Then the next one came. Then you're putting in anonymous tips because she's involved in creating meth. I mean, the levels are just an absolute madness, like nothing I've ever seen before on the entirety of Reddit. I've got to be honest. Guys, have you ever seen anything like this? I doubt it. Incredible scenes of glorious emotion. That's all I can say. Yeah, that was crazy, but you know, that's not the end of the video. As you can see, I've got more coming. So then, moving on to our next story. Now this one is a little bit more tame, but it's still extremely enjoyable. Fired? Are you sure? Okay. So, my friend's father, since retired, was a mechanical engineer. He was around 55 when this happened and very experienced in his field. In fact, he had some skill sets that were close to unique, to the extent that you might be able to replicate them, but at extreme costs. We're talking multiple people from multiple companies, from multiple countries, taking weeks if not months to get up to speed, with specific projects to do the same things. He was also a no BS kind of guy, who did his job, did it well, but also pointed out problems, and expected others to point out problems to him. He was extremely solution oriented and had no time for office politics or keeping a positive attitude at work. Basically, your everyday grumpy older engineer who really knew his thing and always was ready to help if you asked, but was not very forthcoming in team building exercises and so on. He also ran his own business on the side, doing minor projects and so on. As was required by his employer, he had reported this and was sure to not cause any conflicts of interest, so his employer knew and accepted this. He was considered a valuable employee and got several awards that he cared little for, but anyway, during his many years with this employer. By all accounts, they paid him well, respected his knowledge and accommodated his style, and he returned the favour by working very hard and making sure to mentor younger and newly employed engineers to make them effective co-workers. Then his firm was acquired by a larger firm and a new management team installed. Initially, everyone was promised that things would remain the same, but with the new management came a new office culture. The new management pressured for unpaid overtime, for a more American corporate culture with cheering and clapping and so on. He considered it extremely cringe and refused to participate. His status as a long-standing and knowledgeable employee kept him safe for some time before the new management realized that resistance to the new culture centered around him and started pressuring him to play along. When he didn't, they turned increasingly hostile, realizing that he held a lot of soft power in the company, having mentored a large percentage of the engineers, and resistance to their leadership was centering around him. They started ordering him to work overtime. He answered that he was on time with his projects, and that if they had identified an emergency requiring overtime, they would have to bring it up with the union to negotiate the overtime and make sure it was an actual emergency. The contract with the union said no overtime unless in an emergency. They tried to force him to participate in the cheering and clapping by making it mandatory for him to attend and yelling at him to participate, and he did, but so unenthusiastically that the event turned even more cringe and people started started laughing. Not gonna lie guys, that sounds incredibly cringe to me. What even is that? The workday turned more and more hostile, and he knew that things would come to a head sooner or later. Being an experienced engineer and knowing how to document things, he already had his ducks in a row. Then it finally happened. They caught him answering an email for his side business on his work laptop, brought him in and fired him on the spot for theft of company resources. He sat at the conference table and looked the three managers in their eyes, one after the other, and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They all said yes. "Are you really sure you want to do this?" He was escorted to his desk by security to leave his phone, his badge, and his computer at the desk, and then he was escorted out. Once out of the building, he phoned his union representative, who immediately cancelled the firing, claiming there was no just cause, which meant that it would go to the Labour Board for arbitration. You see, the company had an IT policy that it was okay to use the company laptop for personal business, including a side business, as long as you were on break and compliant with IT security protocols, and the company was aware of and had approved his side business, and he was on a break. Of course, he had his declaration of a side business, signed by his former manager, and the IT policy available, and sent both to the union representative. Then he called his lawyer and asked him to send the pre-prepared cease and desist on 2 patents he held, patents that were not that significant and nothing he could make any serious money out of, since they were mostly for very specific things used by the solutions he designed and used at his employers, but still his, that he had brought with him into the employment and allowed the employer to use in exchange for a slightly higher pay, all duly documented in his contract, of course. Then he went home for some vacation and tended to his side business. He was always a man to prepare and had enough money saved up to last him for a good time, to the extent that he considered retiring entirely. My friend said he had 2 job offers from competitors that had looked to sniping him for some time within the week, basically as soon as they learned he was available. He was gracious but declined, but offered them to consult with his side business now that he had the time, which they eagerly accepted, at twice the hourly rate he had made at his earlier employers. His colleagues started ringing the day after for advice, since the projects he had managed could not go on without him. He was perfectly polite, but denied any information and help, saying he had left everything he had with management and to contact them, as he was no longer employed there. Several clients that phoned his private number were told the same thing. Since his private number was not on a public registry, he suspected that both colleagues and clients spent some time and/or money to find it. It took 2 weeks before a manager phoned him and asked things. He politely declined to answer, got yelled at, and replied with something like, "I am sorry, you must have mistaken me for someone who works for you," and hang up. This happened a few times, and the next week HR phoned him and stated the firing had been a mistake and he was welcome back to his job. He again politely declined, saying that he awaited the Labour Board's decision, but until then he was happy to consult for them. At 6 times his hourly pay, after taxes and administrative costs, of course. After a few days of wrangling and trying to negotiate, they had to accept, and then he sprung the patent issue on them, forcing them to pay for those too. Less than 2.5 weeks after being fired, he was back at his desk. After roughly 3 months, the firing came to the Labour Board. The employer stated that they believed they had handled the issue correctly, but was still willing to offer my friend's father his position back, in the interest of goodwill and reconciliation. My friend's father and the union simply stated that he was now employed elsewhere, in his own company, and was therefore no longer available. The Labour Board ruled in my friend's father's and the union's favour, and he got the normal damages: 3 months pay damage and 20 months pay severance package, including pension and of course the lawyer costs of the union paid by the employer. According to my friend, her father continued to work there until he retired, working 20 hours or so per week and 10 to 15 hours for other companies, making a pretty penny, continuing to charge them 3 times what he charged their competitors as a butthole tax. The managers were not fired, but they were moved into their own group apart from the rest of the departments when it came to bonus calculations, and the cost of her father's consultancy fees and the cost of the Labour Board arbitration were budgeted there, meaning they were constantly over budget and thus ineligible for bonuses for several years, which was a decent percentage of the incentives at that company, making at least one of them quit. My friend also said her father usually met any management complaints with a big poop-eating grin and a "what are you gonna do, fire me?" after that. And there we go, slightly more moderate than the first story, absolutely, but still a very good one nonetheless. I guess that's just a pretty simple lesson for employers though, right? If you are going to fire someone, make sure that the person you're going to bring in, well, first of all, make sure that there is someone that you can bring in and has that same skill set and can do that same job of the person you just fired. And second of all, make sure that person that you've just fired doesn't have loads of dirt on you that is potentially going to ruin your company. And then please, don't end up employing that person once again for 6x the cost that you had before. I mean, come on, you should have just let him carry on. I mean, this cringy clapping, what is all that about? You don't need that in any company, that's just ridiculous. Let him do what he's doing. He's clearly a god at what he's doing, his engineering work. Let him be, man. Everyone else can clap around him. He doesn't want to, just allow him, please. Anyway guys, that is going to do it for this episode of r/NuclearRevenge. You guys seem to be loving this subreddit. I mean, this video on screen right now that you can click on right away went down really well as well. If you haven't seen it, watch it. It's a great one. It's very funny as well. Also, if you are new to the channel, hit the button. Come on, why not? We're closing in now on 600,000 subscribers. That is the next big milestone, and I want to hit it pretty soon. So yeah, subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow with a brand new upload.